So we were actually ready to discuss Fermi's golden rule, which is nothing but to figure out what is the transition rate when one system actually transits from one state to a different state, where the initial state belongs to some discrete spectrum, whereas the final state is part of a continuum. And in this regard, we actually talked about two different kinds of perturbations. One is the constant perturbation, where the perturbation is incorporated into the system after at certain time t equal to 0. And the other one is basically the harmonic perturbation, where we actually have said that at a certain point of time there was no dependence on time in the Hamiltonian, but after a t equal to 0 time, there is time dependent perturbation where this is periodic. So such harmonic perturbations are also interesting, and we said that this kind of scenario is interesting because when we will discuss the interaction of electromagnetic fields with atoms, that will actually deal with this kind of scenarios, whereas the constant perturbations are actually dealing with the auto ionizations of atoms. We will basically look at these two cases separately. Now, before going into this discussion, we have to understand one thing, that this is basically a part of a bigger problem. Okay, we have actually another different or difficult problem to first tackle, and then we have to come to these discussions. So what is that problem? The problem is the following. The problem is that we have said that Fermi's golden rule actually helps us calculating the transition rate from some discrete initial state to some continuum of final states. Then one should ask this question, that we can actually count the number of states when we are basically part of a discrete spectrum, but how to count states in the continuum? That is not very clear. So basically what we know is that continuum states means that they are free. That means they are the eigenstates of the momentum operator. Because suppose we have an atom, and that atom, by some means I perturb the atom, there is some internal transitions may happen there, but then it can also happen that one electron basically leaves the atom, making the atom ionized. So if it actually leaves the atom, then I can say that that electron is basically free. So the state of the electron would be given by the momentum eigenstates. So in such cases, how should we proceed to calculate the transition probability and then finally the transition rate? That is the part of the question. So to proceed, what we will do is that we will actually replace the infinite space by a very large cubic box of sides which have the dimension length that is equal to L. So we have this infinite space. The electron is part of this free eigenstate, momentum eigenstates. But we cannot work with such cases simply because our wave function we cannot normalize in such cases. So for such scenarios, what we need to do is that we have to do some regularization. And how to follow that regularization process? We actually do this in the following way. We will basically replace the infinite space by a large cubic box of dimension L, length of the sides being L, and finally imposing the periodic boundary condition on the wave functions, and then we will actually take the limit L tending to infinity. And we will see what happens there. You are all familiar with such kind of calculations, because hopefully you have been actually gone through the discussion which is called box normalization in your PH 204 course. But if not, let me just very briefly tell you what it is. So like the delta function scenario where we actually had replaced this infinite delta function at some point by some rectangle, and then we said that we are actually reducing the width, thereby increasing the height, and that finally at some point this becomes a delta function. Similarly here we will actually introduce this regulator L, and the final result we have to always remember should not depend on any kind of regulator. So here also the final result cannot depend on the length scale L that I have introduced in order to handle this problem. Remember, my problem at hand is to basically count the number of states in the continuum, and for that first let us actually figure out how to tackle the infinite space. So for that, what we said that the wave function that we will have in this three-dimensional space for this free electron is something like this: 1 by square root L cube e to the I k x x e to the I k y y into e to the I k z z. Because I have just said that when I have a free electron that is being represented by momentum eigenstates, and I am writing everything in Cartesian coordinates. And this 1 by L cubes to the power half basically takes care of the normalization of the wave function. So this psi xyz means that the states are correctly normalized. The way I have written, this means that the states are correctly normalized. How should we know that? We actually have to calculate these things. This mod psi xyz squared times d3x. If you integrate, then you will immediately see that there will be 1 by L cube which will come from this mod psi square, and then this e to the ikx and e to the ikyy e to the ikzz, when you take the mod square they will give 1, and what remains is just d3x, the volume of the cube, which is again L cube. So this L cube cancels and we have just 1. So we are happy that this quantity is a good wave function, where these of course the k's, basically the components of k vector are given by kx, ky, kz. They are quantized by the application of the periodic boundary condition which I said here. So the periodic boundary condition has to be followed. So if you impose the periodic boundary condition, that means if you go along x direction and then you claim that from 0 to L, after I reach L, my same wave function comes back. Similarly, if you go in the y direction, psi x comma y plus L comma z will be same psi x y z, and then in the z direction also if you proceed, you will get the same psi x y z. If you impose this on this wave function, then you will immediately get the quantization condition, which is this. So kxl will give you 2 pi times nx, where these nx can be integers. Ky times l will give you 2 pi times ny, and kz times l will give you 2 pi times nz, where nx, ny, nz are all quantum numbers, are all integers. Now you start to think of this scenario as follows. You consider some infinitesimal cubes, each having volume dkx times dky times dkz. So we are thinking of a cube in the momentum space or in the wave number space. Then the number of states in that cube should be calculated from this differential forms. So this is basically kxl is 2 pi nx. Therefore, L times dkx is going to give me 2 pi times dnx. So this dnx, dny, dnz, this I will call delta n. So the number of states that lies within this infinitesimal volume in momentum space can be figured out from this relation. So dnx times dny times dnz can be calculated by using this relation. So I will see that each equation will contribute L by 2 pi. That means I will have a factor of L by 2 pi whole cube, and then dkx, dky, dkz will be multiplied. So L by 2 pi cube d3k should be our delta n. And this, you note that this only depends on this infinitesimal volume element in the momentum space, and it does not depend on the wave vector at all. Now, since we are finding the number of states within an infinitesimal momentum range d3k, because that's what we are actually doing, we can easily check what should it be in the energy range also. Infinitesimal change in momentum will actually introduce some small change in the energy also. So I will call this delta n, okay, I think I have some problem with the notation. Let me call with capital N all these things. So let me call capital N. So delta n, which I had actually figured out to be L by 2 pi cube d3k, I will call this as rho e times dE. This rho e is called density of states. Why? Because this is number of states per unit energy, because on the left hand side you have these infinitesimal numbers sitting there. So this is basically number of states per unit energy, which gives you the density of states. Now, obviously the question would be, how do we connect these two ideas? These two means with this and this, along with this number of states in that infinitesimal volume. So for doing that, let us actually think of this d3k to be a volume element which is determined in spherical coordinates, where my coordinates are k, theta and phi. In spherical polar coordinate, when we talk about the coordinates, we always take the radial distance as r, and then the angular coordinates are theta and phi. Here I am doing all the calculations in momentum space. So this is basically my momentum space. So I will have k as my radius vector, theta and phi as my angular coordinates. So with that, I can actually write this infinitesimal volume element in the momentum space to be equal to k square dk and then sine theta d theta d phi. We are all familiar with that. If it were d3r, I would have written r square dr sine theta d theta d phi. But here my radius vector is nothing but my momentum vector or wave vector. So I am writing it as k square dk sine theta d theta d phi, which is nothing but k square dk times this d omega. Now what is this d omega here? You see that this object, this vector is my k vector. And then this theta and phi, you know, one is this, what is this k vector is making with this z axis, and then the projection of this point on this plane is basically making an angle phi. Then this d omega is basically nothing but sine theta d theta d phi. So it makes a solid angle here. And you want to express the density of states which we have defined here with respect to this relation for free particle, which is E is given by h slash square k square by 2m. So I know if I differentiate this thing, I will get k dk, which should be equal to m by h bar square times dE. So now I know that d3k is nothing but k square dk and then sine theta d theta d phi. So I will write 1k times dk as m by h slash square dE, and another k will remain, and sine theta d theta d phi will be d omega. But now let us recall delta n we have actually written as L by 2 pi cube d3k. Now I will simply replace this d3k by this number or this expression k times m by h bar square d omega dE. And by definition, this was my rho e times dE. So I know what should this rho e be. This rho e will be L cube by 8 pi cube times m by h bar square, and then there is 1 k times d omega. So this is the expression for density of states per unit energy range in the solid angle d omega, within this solid angle d omega. So now you will ask that why I am actually writing this as a function of E, whereas I am still keeping k here. In fact, you can change this k to square root 2me by h bar simply by replacing this k. I mean, just to not complicate things here, I have kept k, but you can always write it in terms of E also. Now, here comes the important point. If we have a very large box, and if we have to sum over the states, remember we had to actually sum over the states in order to figure out the transition rate or the transition probability. So transition probability and transition rate are different. I will come to that soon. So if we have to sum over the states over a very large box, then I have to represent this summation by integration. Of course, there should be these integrations, and then there would be this density of states times this infinitesimal dE interval, which will take care of all the summation of over states. Whereas these dotted symbols here basically are some arbitrary function of momenta, which is written by as this wave vector k of these states. So I will soon come to the calculations which will be making this discussion more concrete. So let us actually discuss this constant perturbation case. We remember that we had discussed or divided our problem into two different parts. One is basically the constant perturbation, and the second one is basically the harmonic perturbation. We are starting our discussion with the constant perturbation, and remember the constant perturbation case, we had nothing. Our original Hamiltonian was just h0 before t less than equal to 0, but after t is 0, there is a small perturbation v introduced into the system which is constant in time. So if we remember, so we had discussed how to calculate the first order coefficient Cm1t earlier in the first part of this lecture 21. So that, if you recall, is nothing but sum over n, then there was this integral 0 to t dt prime e to the I omega mn t prime, and then there was this perturbing matrix, and then divided by I h bar and Cn0. Now we are going to evaluate these quantities in our case. That means for the case where we are having a constant perturbation after a certain time t equal to 0. Now to represent an initial state which I had initially denoted by I at time t equal to 0, we will take Cn0 and we will denote this Cn0 by delta Ni. Because suppose at Cn0 my state is n, but I know for certainty that at t equal to 0 there was no other state, there was only the initial state ket which is denoted by I. So I will replace this Cn0 by delta Ni, and for a transition to a final state which I have denoted here by the ket f at a later time t0, where t0 is greater than 0 of course, we should take this m as my f. So with this reorientation of the symbols, I will have Cf1t0, because here it was m, but now I have replaced it with the final state. So this is Cf1t0. 1 by I h bar will come out of the integral, and then I have this quantity v. So this v I will write as vfi. So this is giving you the matrix elements for transition from I to f, the initial to final state, which is a constant perturbation, which is a time independent perturbation. And then you will have e to the I omega, instead of m and n, I will say omega fi t prime and then dt prime. You will immediately ask, where did this sum over n go? The sum over n simply is not there because Cn0 I have replaced by delta Ni, and that delta Ni has been summed over, and that is why I have got this Vfi and omega Fi here, and the sum is gone. Now I know very well that this Vfi is constant, this IH bar is constant, so I have taken this out of the integral, and this integration is from time t equal to 0 to some finite time t0. So I have to perform this integration, and this integration is the simplest of the integration to be performed. This will give you e to the I omega Fi t prime by I omega Fi. And of course the integration limits are from 0 to t0, and if you do this algebra, it's just a few line of calculations which I have shown here. You do the algebra, and the final answer that you are actually arriving at is basically given by this. Basically what we have done here, we have actually represented this quantity by a sinusoidal function which is sin omega Fi t0 by 2, and therefore I can always take the mod square of this quantity, and I will get mod of Vfi square and then 4 sin square omega Fi t naught by 2, and then divided by h bar square omega Fi square. But omega Fi, remember, was nothing but the difference between Ef and Ei, the energy of the final state and the energy of the initial state, divided by h bar. So this Ef minus Ei, I have simply replaced everything. The final result that you get for the transition probability from the initial to final state to first order in perturbation theory for the time t0, that means the perturbation has been applied till time t0, is given by the mod square of this quantity. And this is nothing but mod of Vfi square and then 4 sin square Ef minus Ei into t0 divided by 2h bar and divided by Ef minus Ei square. Also, you need to check the dimensionality of this quantity. You know that the argument of sine function, this has nothing to do with the dimension, it is dimensionless, and therefore you just have these two quantities and both of them has the dimension of energy and they are both to the power 2. That means the equation is fine. Left hand side is dimensionless, therefore the right hand side is also dimensionless. So this tells us one very interesting thing. This tells us that the transition probability is periodically changing in time. You see that the transition probability which we have obtained is basically sine square of this quantity, whatever is there as the argument. Now I want to make a few statements about this result. Firstly, this result is supposed to be accurate at time t0, but you also have to remember that this is the probability of transition to first order in perturbation theory. So this must be much less than 1. A large transition probability at first order cannot be believed. The result of the calculation of the transition probability to first order cannot be very much near to 1. We cannot believe such kind of results simply because it is not possible, and it will basically require the checking of the higher order terms also. So in general, this must be less than 1, very much less than 1. So next thing what we are going to do is that we are going to plot this function and see what happens there. So if you plot, here I have plotted this, look at the blue curve first. So as you know, this is sine square x by x square of a type of function. You can immediately see that this is the oscillatory behavior that I was talking about of this result. Here I have plotted t naught versus this function pfi, and if you look at this amplitude, the amplitude is given by 4 Vfi square divided by Ef minus Ei whole square. So this is the maximum because sine theta can take value plus minus 1, but here we are talking about sine square, therefore it cannot go above 1. So the maximum value of sine function is 1. So sine square x is 1. Therefore this is the amplitude That means this line is the maximum. Now, we note two different cases here. One is when my EF and EI are not same, they are far apart. Then this transition probability from initial to final state at time t0, it of course looks like this plot as I have mentioned already. And this amplitude therefore must be much less than 1 if I require this object, the perturbation to perturbation theory first order, if I require the transition probability to be much less than 1, I need this object to be much less than 1, because anyway the maximum value this function can take is 1. So this has to be much less than 1, this object. And therefore the first order transition probability Pi to f t0, let me also include one here, is accurate for all times as it is always very small. So for small t naught, the Pfi t naught, it behaves quadratically. If you look at this expansion, you know we have a sine square x type of function here. And for very small theta, if we have very small t naught, then I can actually expand, and this expansion, the first term will go as x square, that means EF minus EI whole square t naught square by 4 h bar square. And if you look at this, I am plotting t naught along x axis, therefore initially this basically goes quadratically. So Pfi t naught behaves quadratically for small values of t naught. That is understandable from this picture. But then it actually does not diverge, it starts to oscillate. So as time grows, the initial quadratic nature actually changes and the oscillation starts. The second point is that if the final state is very far away in energy, of course, if you have EF which is much greater than EI, then you already can see that EF minus EI whole square is very large. And you can see this expression for Pfi to f. We have 1 by EF minus EI whole square. That means EF minus EI whole square is already in the denominator. Therefore, this object is basically very small if my EF is further away from EI. So the amplitude, the Pi to f t naught, amplitude of this object, of this quantity, becomes more and more suppressed if my final state energy is much higher than initial state energy. What does this tell us? This actually shows that a constant perturbation can produce energy changing transitions. Of course, energy changing transition means my final energy is not very close to initial energy, rather it can be further away, but those kind of energy changing transitions where the final state energy is very high, they are suppressed. Now the second case is of this structure when your EFI, the EF, the final state energy, is basically very close to the initial energy. So EF tending to EI is the other case. So when EF tends to EI, our omega Fi by definition, which is EF minus EI by H bar, it tends to 0. Now when this omega Fi tends to 0, we can write this quantity sine square omega Fi t naught by 2. Remember, this quantity was actually present in the transition probability. So this was this quantity sine square omega Fi t naught by 2 or EF minus EI by 2 h bar sine square. This quantity, this can be approximated. So if we make a series, then the first term will be x square sine square x, with x being small we can expand this thing, and the first term will be x square. So here it will be EF minus EI whole square times T naught square by 4 h bar square. So therefore, our P I to F, the probability of transition I to F from initial to final state at time t0 in the limit when EF is very close to EI can be written as follows. We have this amplitude 4 VFI mod square divided by EF minus EI square. And then this sine square term can actually be approximated, as we have seen, as EF minus EI whole square T naught square by 4 h bar square. So this quantity immediately says that these two energy factors cancels out from the numerator and the denominator, and what remains is mod VFI square T naught square by h bar square. Remember, what was this VFI? VFI was the constant perturbations matrix element. So VFI mod square is basically related to h prime, and T naught square was the time through which we are applying this perturbation, constant perturbation. So we can see that for small values of this argument of sine square, we have a quadratic dependence on time, which is basically the same growth that we actually have observed in the first case. You remember this behavior, that we had this behavior if we have T naught to be very, or the argument of sine square is very small. So for small T naught, there is a quadratic behavior if we expand the sine square term. And in the first case, since EF minus EI was non-zero, and in fact EF was much greater than EI, we had this oscillatory behavior. But here, EF being very close to EI, we have a behavior which is not oscillatory in T naught, rather it is quadratic in T naught. So for such cases where we have EF very close to EI or EF is equal to FI, the probability of transition grows, and it grows quadratically in time. For the time, as long as the perturbation is being applied, it is a square of that time. And therefore it is very clear that this is being done without having any bound. But that causes a problem. The problem is that this cannot happen for too long a time, simply because this quantity PFI or PI to F, the probability of transition from the initial to final state at a time t naught, cannot become larger than or more than 1, because it's the probability, so it cannot go more than 1. Therefore, if I apply the constant perturbation for too long a time, then there is a possibility that this object, this quantity P I to F T naught, becomes unboundedly large, and that will not serve our purpose. So this result, whatever we have obtained here for the transition probability, when the initial and final state energies are almost close to each other, this result is true for small enough time t naught. But remember, this was not our target. Our target was something different. So far, what we have obtained is we have actually calculated the transition probability for transition from initial to final state when a certain kind of perturbation has been applied on the system at a certain time t equal to 0, and that constant perturbation is remaining on the system for a time interval of t naught. So from 0 to t naught there was this perturbation, and we have calculated the transition probability that if I start with a system I, state gate I, described by state gate I, for certain time t less than equal to 0, and the Hamiltonian of the original system was described by simple H naught, a time independent perturbation whose eigenvalues and eigenstates are completely known to us. Then at time t equal to 0, we apply this perturbation. Our question was actually, what is the transition probability for the state gate I to go into some other state gate F, which is the final state gate. So that we have obtained. But now we ask this question that what if our final state is in the continuum? For that, we actually have to integrate the transition probability, because that's what we said when we discussed the density of states. So now we have a interval which is continuous. There is a continuous distribution. The final state is in the continuum and EF is in the continuum, and we can actually take a scenario where we are actually looking at very small intervals and we are trying to count the number of states within these very small intervals, delta capital N. Remember, that is how we actually have calculated. So now our target will be to actually integrate the transition probability over the continuum of final states. And we also need to calculate what is known as the transition rate. What is transition rate? Transition rate is nothing but the probability of transition per unit time. So that is how we have defined the transition rate. So for example, take this example where we are shining light on an atom. Then suppose at some point ionization happens, something which is similar to the photoelectric effect. But if you have a lot of atoms, say billions and billions of atoms, suppose we are having a metal and then we are shining light continuously on this metallic sheet, and then we can say that we actually find out the number of atoms coming out of this metallic sheet or some metallic surface. So we find out what is the transition rate, what is the probability of transition, that certain atoms having bound electrons, then at certain point of time after I shine the light, the electrons completely come out of the atom and making it ionized atom, and we are trying to calculate the transition rate. That means per unit time what is the probability of transition, how many atoms will ionize per unit time. That is the question that we ask. Of course, in order to calculate that, we have to proceed in the following manner. The first thing that we need to do is that we have to calculate the sum of transition probabilities over the final state to first order in perturbation theory. That means we have to calculate this PFI, I to F, for the time through which the perturbation has been applied, which we in our case we have denoted by T naught, and we are calculating it to first order in perturbation theory, and then we will have to sum over all the final states. But now sum over the final state is basically meaning that we are actually summing over a continuum of states, and hence we need to replace this sum. This sum has to be replaced by some integral having this rho times dEf, where rho EF dEf is nothing but basically this rho EF was the density of states, dEf basically was these small intervals which we were actually thinking about in the continuum. So we will actually replace this sum over final state by an integral where pi to f1 t naught will be multiplied by rho EF dEf. Remember, this thing is nothing but the number of states. Rho EF dEf is the number of states in an infinitesimal interval, because remember that delta n was given by rho E times dE. Now we actually put all the expressions that we have obtained for pi to f t naught. So pi to f t naught was 4 mod vfi square by ef minus ei whole square, and then this sine square ef minus ei t naught by 2h bar multiplied by rho ef def. Now comes the problem. Now once I have given this to you, you might think, okay, fine, this gives me the sum over final states, and therefore this should be my Fermi golden rule, because we cannot proceed any further. Why we can't proceed any further? Because we really do not know what this rho EF is. It will change from system to system. We do not know how this VFI, this quantity depend on energy, and therefore we really cannot perform this integration. But now we also look at in another way. So suppose there is, we already have said that because of the suppression, there is a suppressing factor which is given by EF minus EI to the power minus 2. This means that only a narrow band of state contributes to this, because if this is very large, then we have seen that this quantity itself is very small. So in order to have some significant contribution, we will only have to take a narrow band of state which contributes. Narrow band means that where the energies are very close to each other. So here this is the continuum, and I will have to have some EI which is basically in the continuum roughly, and that is very close to this EF. So only a narrow band of states actually contribute, and because this probability of transition from initial to final state is in the above integral is suppressed if EF and EI are largely different from each other. That is, if the final state and initial states are situated far away in the energy scale, then we already have seen that only this narrow band of energies, or narrow band from which the states will contribute to this integral. Hence the contribution to the integral will occur for a very narrow range of energy, which we have denoted by delta EF of EF near EI. Okay, so that is what we actually want to say. Now we will assume that because of this narrow band, we will assume that this object VFI mod square as well as rho EF are very slowly varying, and therefore they are approximately constant over the narrow interval EF. So that is how, this is the only way, this is the only argument by which you can say that rho EF, the density of states at this point EF, basically is very small. There is no change if we consider a very narrow range of energy. Within that range of energy near this final energy, which is also very close to EI, both VFI as well as rho EF, they are approximately constant. So we can basically take this object as well as rho out of the integral, and what remains is this integration. So this is the beauty of the argument that Fermi's golden rule tells you, that irrespective of whatever you are doing, because your contribution to the density of states as well as the dependence of VFI on the energy always will remain constant, roughly constant over a very narrow band of energy, these quantities with which we were actually in trouble while performing the integration, because we really do not know what are the forms of these objects or these quantities, we would not have been able to perform the integral. They are basically constant. We can take them out of this integration sign. So now basically we actually have written this down as this, and then we also note that this omega Fi, I can change the variable def to omega Fi simply by mentioning that def is nothing but h bar d omega Fi, because omega Fi is basically Ef minus Ei, so def is basically d omega Fi. So I have changed the variable. Now in order to perform this integration, it is very important for us to look into the functional form, and let us plot this integrand. So this is, let us denote this object by I, integral I t0, and let us see how does this object sine square x by x square look like. And as you all know, this is how the plot looks like. In fact, you can see that the maximum contribution basically comes from this lobe, the central lobe, which is situated around the omega fi equal to 0 point. Now the zeros of the function, so the function here is sine square omega fi t naught by 2. These zeros of the function basically comes at omega fi equal to 2 pi n by t naught. That is very easily checkable. You can check it from this functional form, where n is nothing but some integer. So basically you can see that this function comes down to 0 at minus 2 pi by t0. This function comes down to 0 at plus 2 pi by t0. So these are the zeros of the function. And then you can also check that basically this sine square function becomes 0 at t0 square by 4. So therefore you look at this in this region, the maximum contribution, in fact if you actually look at the calculation, you can find out that the maximum contribution, the 90% contribution to the integral basically comes from this central lobe. And then if you actually incorporate these side two lobes, then 95% of the result of the integration result will come from this part only. Anyway, so now let us actually look at this maximum contributing part. Here you see that height of this object is of basically t naught square, whereas the width here is 1 by t naught. Therefore the area basically goes as t naught. Therefore we can actually expect that this integration will actually go as t naught. And then we can immediately say, since this basically goes as t naught, the transition rate, which is basically nothing but the probability of transition per unit time, that will not depend on t naught at all, because then we have to actually divide the right hand side by t naught. And here after doing the integration, since you will get 1 t naught, the right hand side will simply become independent of t naught. So that linearity of t naught, a linearity in t naught of this integration result is very important. That will tell that we will have a constant transition rate. Now here, as I said, that zeros of the function basically occurs at 2 pi n by t naught. This means that ef minus ei is 2 pi n h bar by t naught. And now, as I already have said verbally, that the largest contribution to this integral I t naught, this comes from the main central lobe, which is this. And this means that omega fi, which is nothing but ef minus ei by h bar, basically lies within this range. So if your omega fi lies within this range, then you have the maximum contribution to the integral. If we transform these to ef and ei, then I can say that my ef, the final state energy, lies within this range, that ei minus 2 pi h bar by t naught and ei plus 2 pi h bar by t naught. So now for the validity of our calculation, therefore, we need this range to be a very narrow band, and therefore T0 must be sufficiently large, because T0 is basically sitting in the denominator. Therefore, for our validity of our calculation, because we have at the very beginning we have said that we can actually take this thing out if we have basically very narrow band of energies, and that narrow band can be actually justified if we take T naught to be sufficiently large. So we are going to wait long enough so that the peak around omega fi equal to 0 becomes narrower and narrower, and therefore most contributions to this integral I t naught comes from the lobe where our peak is omega fi equal to 0 is, that means where omega ef is very close to ei or ef almost equal to ei. So the maximum contribution should therefore be coming from this lobe. Now the integration is very easy to be done. You choose a variable, new variable u, which is omega fi t naught by 2. Therefore du is nothing but t naught by 2 d omega fi. And remember, this was your I t naught. This is your I t naught. So this was your I t naught. So you have sine square omega fi t naught by 2 divided by omega fi square, and then d omega fi, and then times h bar. H bar was there because here it was ef, and ef means that it is h bar omega fi. So now we change the variable to u, and immediately this becomes u, but then omega square fi, this will give you 4u square by t naught. So this 4 by t naught square is there. And similarly, when we change d omega fi to du, a factor of 2 by t naught will also come. So overall we will have these things which are basically constants, 2 h bar t naught square by 4 t naught, and then sine square u by u into du. Of course these will actually, the range of the integration should be from minus infinity to infinity. This is simply because there is little change in energy even if you incorporate more and more lobes in the plot. We had actually got 90% of the contribution from main lobe, while including the next two lobes which I just said, one left and one to the right of the main lobe. That will bring the result up to 95% of the total contribution. This you can actually figure out. Of course, the plot here what I showed is not up to scale, but as I said, this alone will contribute 90%. One can check this numerically also. And then if you incorporate this side 2 along with the peak 1, then 95% of the result will actually come from these three lobes only. So so that means that we actually, even if we include 10 lobes on each side, we can get 99% of the answer. And for sufficiently large t naught, it is still a narrow range. That is what we actually wanted. So here the justification of taking this limit from minus infinity to infinity is basically the fact that even if we take very large values of this variable u, this is not going to affect our result. And now this is a standard integral whose result is basically pi. Therefore this is pi h bar t naught by 2 is your I, result of the integration I t naught. Now this we can also say in another way, that on the other hand, you do not want to take too large t naught, simply because for too large t naught, this object pi to f summed over f to the first order, it goes wrong. In fact, if it is very large, then we are in trouble, because we are only calculating to first order in perturbation theory. So we have to have a balance. On one hand, we are saying that we will need as much t naught as possible, such that our integration result is good. So that is why we have said here that we need the range to be a narrow one, and therefore t naught must be sufficiently large, simply because here t naught is coming in the denominator. So we needed t naught to be large, but we also needed t naught to be not as large, such that this object, the summation, basically goes very large, and thereby defeating the purpose of doing perturbation theory calculations. So we have to have a balance. So let us see how to do that. But first of all, the summation, now we have actually replaced by the integral, and then we had introduced the density of states, and after doing the integration, we have actually arrived at this result, which is given by pi h bar t naught by 2. And therefore your final result of this summation, which is basically now been replaced by the integration, is nothing but 2 pi by h bar mod Vfi square rho ei times T naught. In fact, here, because T naught is just a label, it does not say that you have to only work till time t equal to T naught. It can be any t depending upon for how long you are actually applying the perturbation. So I just replace everywhere this T naught by t. So that is your final result, and this holds for sufficiently large t also. So now we have in the right hand side this t, therefore the rate of transition pi to f divided by t, that is how we define the rate of transition, is basically independent of t. It is nothing but 2 pi rho ei mod Vfi square divided by h bar, and this is known as Fermi's golden rule. So this says that the rate of transition from a discrete state to a group in the continuum is a constant. It is independent of time, and this is not true if only discrete final and initial states are involved. We will see that also later. So this is only true if there is a transition from a discrete state to a group in the continuum. That is always going to be its constant, and irrespective of whatever system you are talking about, because you see that this is a general calculation. We have not basically specifically said anything about what system we are working with. So now let us actually conclude our discussion by saying that, or commenting something about this T naught. We said that T naught has to be sufficiently large such that within the limit which is given by this, rho and Vfi mod square are almost constant. That was our initial requirement. But this T0 being large, it should not be as large such that this object becomes anywhere near to 1. Because remember, we are actually calculating everything to first order in perturbation theory. So that is why this 1 is sitting here. So both these criteria, that T naught on one hand needs to be large, as well as it cannot be much large such that this object is very large, can be satisfied if Vfi, the perturbation, is sufficiently small. So that is how one proceed to calculate, and this is the main result of our discussion, the Fermi's golden rule. So I hope that you actually go through this calculation carefully, and we will see in the next few classes some applications of Fermi's golden rule, and then we will proceed to discuss the stimulated and spontaneous emissions.